Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Straight Out of BS podcast. Wanted to thank everybody for continuing to share the videos, liking them, commenting them, and if you're not subscribed already to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. It helps the algorithms and all of that. I want to thank you, Jeneen Miller. Thank you for being my Patreon member. Really appreciate it. You're my first and only one, so it really means a lot. Anybody that might be interested in supporting the podcast, donation links are in the description of the video. So, so inspired. It's not expected. It's totally not expected, but everything that is donated does go back into the podcast to make it better. So with that being said, I'd like to do a moment of silence for the person still suffering with intrusive thoughts, addiction, anything like that. So on the count of three, I'm going to do a moment of silence. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you for that. And with that being said, I want to go ahead and introduce my guest for the day. Go ahead and introduce yourself and what school you went to and what years.
Hi, I'm Nora Ash. I'm a survivor from 2003 to 2005. I first went to what was then Walkabout Therapeutic Expeditions. It's now Outback. And then I went to Mission Mountain School in Montana.
Okay, and did you get transported or what? And what were the circumstances leading up to you going there? And were you transported? And walk us through that.
So, excuse me, I'm adopted. And so once I got in my teenage years, I started, really struggling and I didn't have a support system. So I picked up some maladaptive behaviors, primarily smoking weed and hanging out with older kids. And then I was transported. I got picked up at 4 in the morning by strangers. My parents were nowhere to be seen, and then they took me out of my house and put me on a plane and dropped me off in the middle of the wilderness.
Okay, and walk us through like your first day at Wilderness.
I got there super late at night. They had a rule where you had to make a spoon out of a stick before you were allowed to eat, which because I got there late at night, I wasn't able to do. And they kind of just like left me with my stuff, maybe like 1,000 yards from the rest of the group. Like I could see them, but they were far enough away that there was definitely no interaction at all whatsoever. Before they took me into Wilderness itself, I was taken to their headquarters, and that's where they give you all your gear. They do the strip search. They basically make sure you have nothing on you that you're not supposed to. They take everything from you, everything from your clothes, literally everything, and they issue you gear and clothes. One thing that I that I thought was kind of weird about ours is those like army green like knit sweaters that they used to have, the long sleeved ones with the like plasticky stuff on the shoulders. Well, we had some of those, except ours had German flags on them. I have no idea where they got them.
That's odd.
That's what I thought too. I was like, what on earth is this? Like, where am I? No one had explained to me yet, like what was happening or like what this was yet. And so they give you your gear. Your shelter and your backpack both consist of a tarp and a piece of parachute cord. So when you're making your backpack, you put everything inside the tarp, kind of fold it up into like a burrito shape, and then tie it with the parachute cord in a certain way so that you have straps attached to it. So parachute cord is your backpack straps. And then at night, you take that whole thing apart, and the tarp and the parachute cord are your shelter.
Very interesting. Okay. How long after you got there till you realized, till everything sunk in and you fully realized where you were?
That was pretty instant for me. Like once I actually got out there, I was like, crap, because I knew the summer before I had gone to a different wilderness type program, but it wasn't a therapeutic kind of thing. It was just summer camp where you hiked and camped instead of being in one spot. And there were girls there who had told me about real wilderness programs. And so I knew what they were. So once I got there, I was like, that's exactly what my parents did. Like, this is where I am. And I had no idea how long I was supposed to stay. Like, nobody told me anything.
Okay. How long did you end up staying?
I was there for 5 weeks. At least about 2 weeks of that was spent dealing with being stuck in a blizzard.
Okay. My cat just cut me on accident, but okay. Calm down there, Lilith. Calm down. You drew blood. Okay. So sorry about that. I got kind of distracted. Okay, so you said you went to Wilderness, and then what was the other school? Sorry, I kind of.
It was called Mission Mountain School. It was in this little tiny town in northern Montana, about an hour away from Glacier National Park, so very northern Montana.
Okay.
It was started by a man who was the original treasurer of NatSap. He was one of their founding members.
Okay.
And it closed down in 2008 after a congressional hearing where a former student and a former therapist both testified about the things that went on there.
Okay. Um, how was the food at Wilderness? Or what did they give you for food? Did they give you like, because I went on Wilderness when I was at Spring Creek, and they would give us like rations for like a certain amount of time, and then you'd have to make them last for that amount of time.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did. So when they were issuing my gear at first, they give you like a rations bag. It's like one of those sleeping bag style stuff sack things that just has food in it. I believe it was supposed to last a week because that's how often we got drops. And it was a combination of like ready to eat stuff like packaged tuna, like those like vacuum sealed packs, peanut butter, crackers, things like that. But then there was also food that you had to cook, like dry pasta, dry beans, rice, things like that. And the way that they did food there was really weird. Because when I got into Wilderness, because you have to make a spoon in order to earn the privilege of eating, they took the whole bag when I first got there. They took it with my shoes at night because they still require you to carry it even if you're not allowed to use it. So when they came to take my shoes, which they do every night so you can't run away, when they came to take those, they took my food bag and I didn't get it back. Like I wasn't allowed to eat from it until I made a spoon, which wasn't until the following night. So I went, let's see, I went about 48 hours without eating, just because rather than having me make a spoon and then hiking for the day, they just went along with their regular schedule and we hiked all day. And it wasn't until that night that I was able to eat. And then after that, you have to create a busting kit, which consists of some little carved sticks, a rock, a little tiny, like, I don't know, like 7-inch long piece of wood, and a curved stick that you use your parachute cord for yet again in order to make a bow. And then you use that to start a fire. And the second rule with food is that you weren't allowed to eat hot food or cook until you had made a fire with that. Well, 3 days after I got there, on December 25th, 2003, it started snowing. And it snowed heavily for a week. That blizzard is a record-breaking blizzard in Utah. It is in the top 10. And we actually ended up running out of food, running out of water. We had to melt snow for water. And we were stuck. They couldn't get vehicles in, or wouldn't, in order to get us out of there. We ended up getting about 7 feet of snow, and we were just stuck until it melted. Like, we had to wait for it to melt and before we could move anywhere and before they could get to us.
Okay, well, that's crazy. I'm not surprised, but it's just kind of weird that they wouldn't get you evacuated in that circumstance.
Right.
Okay, what was the hardest part about being at the Wilderness place, and how did you deal with it?
Probably knowing that we were stuck. 'Cause the first couple days, I mean, it wasn't like, in comparison, it wasn't too bad. You know, the weather was relatively nice. It was cold, but it wasn't freezing. Um, and then once it started snowing, like the second I saw that it was snowing, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be awful. And I started throwing up like right then. And I threw up like,
from
huh?
anxiety? From
Yep.
anxiety?
Yep. I threw up every 3 to 5 hours until we were able to move to another campsite. So I threw up for a good 12 days straight. The staff accused me of having an eating disorder because I was throwing up so much. And on top of that, because we ran out of food, obviously the first food we ran out of was the pre-prepared stuff. So there was a day or two where I was eating nothing but dry pasta and dry beans, uncooked rice, because that's all there was. And then we ran out of food and we didn't have anything else for another 5 days at least.
Okay. And how did you end up, so that was the hardest part. How did you end up dealing with it?
That's a really good question. I've always had this kind of mental ability to shut off my emotions and the emotional connection to things. Like, so I just did that. I dissociated basically. And focused entirely on just survival. I almost get in this mindset of like, yeah, this sucks, this is horrendous, but I'm gonna have to deal with the emotional side later because right now I have to keep myself alive.
It sounds kind of like fight or flight.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay. Um, walk us through getting transported to the other facility. Were you told that you were going to go to the other facility? And if there's anything else you want to touch on with the wilderness, go ahead. Feel free to do that.
Well, I think it's interesting that we're recording today because that wilderness program today is their last day open. They're finally shutting down for good. I'm super excited.
That's why we did today, right?
Yep. And the other thing with that is winters. I live in Utah still, and this place is in Utah. And the winters are especially hard. This year was really hard because every time it snows, that's when I get my night terrors and my nightmares that just throw off my whole day. I'm pretty solid and strong in my healing and managing my trigger responses. I've kind of learned to minimize most of my triggers to a point that they don't bother me anymore. But the night terrors that come with the snow are the one thing that I've never been able to get a handle on. And this year was a really hard, very long winter. It started snowing at the end of September, and I think the last snow we got was just barely at the end of April. And we got a lot of snow this year. It was a record-breaking year. So every time it snows, knowing that this place is open, I know there's kids still out there. And I know there's kids going through the same things that I did. So I'm hoping that with this closure this next winter, maybe I might be able to start managing the night terrors a little bit better. Because, I mean, obviously there's other wilderness programs out there. There's still kids out in the same weather, but I think it makes it a little bit more personal or deeper when you are attached, like when you're attached to that program, like knowing that that specific program is still existing in exactly the same way it did.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, I'm hoping that this next winter will be a turning point for me in managing that last trigger that I can't get a hold on.
I hope so too. Okay. Walk us through. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on with the wilderness?
No, that's about it.
Okay, looking back on it, what uh, what have you struggled with? Night terrors is one of them, but is there anything else that you've struggled with as a result directly of the wilderness program?
Not specifically of the wilderness, but this one is because the transporters, I sleep very lightly. Um, every little thing will wake me up. And when somebody wakes me up, I always like snap awake in a panic because like it's still kind of, I'm not conscious, like I'm not coherent. So it like snaps me back into that moment for a second. And then I sleep very lightly because I'm constantly subconsciously expecting that.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Walk us through your transport to the other program, and if were you told that you were going to the other program? Walk us through that. And
So
did you graduate from wilderness? Like, did you
no, no way.
is
No,
there
I didn't even ever make a busting kit. I didn't even ever finish my busting kit or bust a fire
okay? Is there
because
graduating from there? Is there? Can you graduate from?
that's a good question. I don't think so. I think it's just when you're because the way that what wilderness purpose that wilderness served for me at least was a holding place till my long-term program had a spot.
Interesting. Okay.
Like because my parents had a trip planned to Mexico for Christmas and didn't trust me to go with them. So they dumped me in wilderness and went to Mexico.
That's doesn't trust you to go to Mexico with him. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, the transport between the two is they picked up me and one other girl from my wilderness. It's really weird because the whole time I was in wilderness, I was on distance, so I wasn't allowed to be near or interact with the group. The whole 5 weeks I was there, I didn't talk to another student the whole time I was there.
Sounds like Black Cloud from the.
I could
That's
see
Black Cloud.
them, I could hear them, but like in order for me to even have tried to communicate with them, I would have had to yell. That's how far I was the whole time I was there.
That sounds like very similar to something they call Black Cloud in the program I went to. And if they
Mhm.
put you in Black Cloud, essentially, you can't talk to anybody. You can't acknowledge anybody. You can't you have to look down.
Mhm.
Put on that a few times, but it sounds very similar to that. So I just
Yeah, very much so. The only people I wasn't even allowed to interact with half the staff because they weren't considered senior enough to talk to me.
And that was because they're afraid you were gonna run or something, or
That's how they start out everybody when they come into this program. You
interesting.
need to, so building your busting kit and making a fire with it, that's like your milestone turning point. What comes with that is you are allowed to have hot food, so you're allowed to cook. You are allowed to use the group fire that the staff make every night. So you don't have to make your own fire every single night. You're allowed to use that group fire. And then you become part of the group. You're allowed to sit around the group fire. You're allowed to interact with the other kids. So making that fire, if you don't do that, you do not move past what you're calling black cloud.
Yeah.
You don't move past that point. You don't get to become any physically closer to the group, and you don't get hot food or access to fire, which made the blizzard really hard for me because what they did is all the other girls had already earned those privileges. So what they did was they made a group shelter out of all of their tarps. The staff helped them, and then they had a fire right next to it. So they had, something kind of set up, but I'm 1,000 yards away from everybody else, and I'm not allowed anywhere near the fire.
Yeah.
They gave us sleeping bags that were rated at 20 degrees, and it was easily getting down to -20 or very close to it. So warmth was non-existent. I did not once it started snowing, I got cold And I did not feel warm again until I got to my next program.
I'm sorry I had to go through that. Was there any points in the wilderness program? And then we'll move on to the other program. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm thinking of things. Was there any point in the wilderness program, and probably not, but was there any point where you actually were able to take in like any of the nature's beauty? Because you're in fucking the wilderness. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I know when I was in the wilderness, like, it fucking sucked, yeah. But there were some times when it was like, this is fucking beautiful. But, you know, not everybody's gonna be able to experience like.
Well, and I'm one of those people who, yeah, I always try to see, you know, the maximum amount of beauty anywhere in nature when I'm there. Still, even after this. But no, because everything was covered in snow, it was just a white wasteland.
Okay. Okay. I'm just curious about that. Did they tell you were going to the other program? That's one.
Eventually. So they pulled me and this other girl out at the same time. They pulled me out because normally they would have come and picked me up the next day when I was actually leaving, but they pulled me out with her because they were supposed to get another blizzard the next day. And they didn't want to have to try to get me out of that. So just knowing that, they had full intentions of leaving those other girls out there for another blizzard.
Yeah.
So they pulled me out. I spent the night at their headquarters. The first thing and this is probably the best part of wilderness because we didn't shower there. You know, some programs have those, they'll use those like rubber bags that you can put out in the sun to warm up and then hang it from a tree and shower that way. That there was no warming up that water. It would freeze solid before the sun was able to do anything. Like the sun couldn't keep up with the cold. So there was no showering. The first thing that they let me do was take a shower, unsupervised, and I was allowed to use all the hot water I wanted. That
Was it timed?
No, not that one.
That's cool.
And I think part of it was because there were no senior staff there at the time because it was evening, everybody had left for the day, and they left me with the owner's kids. They were the ones who watched me overnight. Or like I know they were related to the owner in some way, but they were barely older than I was. They were like 19 and 21. And so they were the ones who were in charge of making sure that the shower was timed and that the other thing is, like, even though I was out of wilderness, I was still not allowed to eat anything that was hot or that was not the type of food that they would have issued to us. So I still had to eat wilderness food after I came out of wilderness, which was kind of weird.
That's really weird. What did they tell you why?
No, they just said until I left the program, I had to follow their rules.
Okay. And
so I spent the night there, and honestly, that shower probably screwed me over, because at the time I didn't know it, but I had really bad frostbite on my feet. I could tell looking at them, they hurt pretty bad, and for a couple weeks, every time we'd have to hike, they'd bother me. And they were red, but they never turned black or anything. They never did what you normally would assume with frostbite.
Yeah.
But I didn't know it at the time. So the first thing I did after I came out of the cold was immediately put hot water on them for a long period of time. It didn't gradually warm up. But nobody knew it because, I'd say my feet hurt, and I mean, you know how they are, that who fucking cares? We don't. Just keep walking. And so the next morning I got up and this girl's parents, the other girl's parents, had come to get her the day before, when they pulled us out. And so I expected the next day that my parents were going to come get me. Instead, there was a woman from a transport company who came to get me. And that's when they told me I was going to another program. Which, and this woman was really nice. I guess I kind of got lucky with the people who were in charge of me between leaving Wilderness and getting to my next program, because like I said, I got to take a hot shower that was as long as I wanted, even though I wasn't supposed to. This woman allowed me to get food at the airport, because even though it was a rule that she wasn't supposed to allow me to eat. So, you know, it's those little tiny things you know, that we usually take for granted, you know, being able to eat during the course of a day, being able to take a hot shower for as long as you want. Like, those were the things that, like, made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely dying inside. And so she took me from Utah to Montana. We rented a car, drove up to my program, and we got there late at night. They took me into the intake office and did the whole intake. It took about an hour. They had a rule where you take your shoes off when you come in when you go into a building. You know, pretty normal rule. And the intake took about an hour. And then we were going to go outside so that they could issue me my clothes and stuff. And I went to put my shoes on. I had Converse at the time, black Converse, low tops. And I went to put them on, and I couldn't get my feet into them. My feet had started swelling, which was not too bad at this point. It was just a little bit, but enough that I couldn't get my shoes on. And I was like, what is going on here? And then by the time I made it to bed, about an hour later, and that was the first time they introduced me to another student who was my big sister. They had a big sister program, or like system, where they'd match an older student with new students. You could only be a big sister if they consider, I guess, if you were brainwashed enough to rave about the program. I never got a little sister because I was not deemed responsible enough. So they introduced me to my big sister. We go to get in bed, and I had to climb a ladder to get into the top bunk. And the second I put my foot on that rung, it was like excruciating pain all the way through my feet. And then I actually looked at it, and my feet were like horrendously swollen. And over the course of the next couple days, they swelled so much that the skin tore apart. It would fill my shoes with blood. And they stayed that way for 4 months. Not once was I taken to a doctor. The school nurse looked at him, said, okay, just be careful. And that's the extent of the medical attention I got for that.
They took you. So after they took you, what made them finally take you to the doctor?
They didn't. They never did.
Okay. Do you have lasting complications because of that?
Oh, yeah. I have nerve damage in my feet. Luckily, they don't swell anymore, but they will turn red. The worst part, though, is most people know the sensation of when your skin is cold, like your hands are like, you know, you've been outside, maybe shoveling or something like that. You put your hands under some warm water and it burns. I feel that like burning from the inside kind of feeling in my feet every time it gets cold. I don't feel cold anymore. That's the sensation I get when they're cold.
Crazy. That's crazy. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Was this a points and levels program? Did they have consequences or like rule violations against everything?
Yeah. So it had a phase system, which was kind of like your progression system. The first phase was taking stock, and that phase was focused entirely on admitting everything you'd done wrong. We had packets that were like, you know, half an inch to an inch thick of questions about They were called histories. We had a food history where we had to write every detail of everything negative or, not perfect that we'd ever had with food. So every interaction that we'd had with food that was even remotely negative, we had to put down, or positive. If you were one of those people who enjoyed food, that was considered a problem too. And then we had our drug and alcohol history. So we had to go over all substances and everything we'd ever used and who we'd ever used with and where we got it. And but the worst one for everybody was the sexual history, where we had to outline every single time we'd had a sexual interaction with anybody. We had to name them, give dates if we knew them, and we had to write about them in detail. What it really comes down to is we were basically writing child porn. And then we had to go over those histories with our therapists. In my case, it was a male therapist. And then they send a copy to your parents and you have a phone call about it. So you have a phone call about each history separately. And then you have to read your entire history to the whole group and whatever staff happens to be there. So everybody knows every detail of everything you've ever done. And the sexual one was probably the hardest, the worst, and the most inappropriate thing that I did in the entire program.
Yeah, it sounds like grooming.
It is very much so. Actually, there was one staff member who would groom girls and stay in contact with them after they left, even if they weren't 18. He was very much a predator.
Did you ever hear anything about any drugs being brought onto the facility?
No. Actually, one time a brand new girl tried to hide them in the lining of her suitcase and they found them. But no, my program was incredibly small. The highest number that we had at one time on campus was 38. And this was the kind of program that would, they manipulated us and used us against each other, because if you snitched on somebody for doing anything remotely wrong, you were rewarded and they were punished. And if you didn't snitch and they found out, it was a group punishment.
Yep.
So that we had that, reward consequence system. And we were expected to use it against each other. So getting away with, trying to get drugs on campus, someone would have known within 3 minutes of you getting to your cabin, and they would have found out.
Okay.
If you even managed to get that far.
Okay. What about staff? Did you hear anything or see anything that would make you think that they might have been on drugs, or did you see any staff bringing in drugs or hear about it?
No. I always kind of suspected that the owner might drink some. His wife seemed like she was very off consistently when she'd interact with us, but they were the only ones that I ever really saw anything from.
Okay, and off how?
It's a good question. Like she didn't seem like she was all there. It might have just been her personality. Like she had a very eclectic, kind of eccentric mindset, almost reminiscent of an old hippie. But she seemed like she wasn't totally in touch with reality.
Okay. Fair enough. Was there seminars in your program? It kind of sounds like they're writing out the histories. It's kind of like what we did in our seminars. So I assume there wasn't any self-improvement seminars they made you go through.
The closest we got to that was can you explain what a seminar is? Like, who's there?
There's like 100 people or 200 that you don't know, and then there's a facilitator at the front of the room, and they essentially go over different key points, and then you have to share in small groups about your experiences, and then you have to, there's certain processes that you have to do.
No, we didn't. It wasn't like The only people that we ever saw that we technically didn't know were the parents of the other girls.
I mean, like people that you didn't know, as in like people, other people in the facility. Like,
no, because my facility was so small, we did everything together.
okay.
We other than sleep, basically, we had 6 cabins, technically 6 cabins, but it was 4 different buildings. Cabin 1 and 2 were in one building, cabin 3 and 4 were in another, and those ones were like a bedroom on each side connected with a hallway and a bathroom in the middle that both sides of the cabin would share. So there was cabin 1 and 2, 3 and 4. Cabin 5 was separate with its own bathroom, and cabin 6 was the group house. So downstairs in that house was where we do our group therapy every single night, with everybody on campus, staff and students. We would all go down to the group house for group every night. And then upstairs in the group house was cabin 6. And that's usually like, to be in cabin 6, because it was a little bit further, like it was like down a hill from the where the other cabins were and where the staff building was. In order to live in cabin 6, you had to be in phase 3 or 4. Like you had to be a trusted student.
Big sister, essentially.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, you had to be at the point where you were eligible to be a big sister.
Okay, so in my program, that would have been junior staff. It would have been after you got voted up into junior staff on level 4. You got to go down to the lower facility and have more privilege.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like that, but there was never any like distinction of like these girls have any kind of authority over anybody else, or like we're expected to listen to them. It was just like it was more of a subconscious thing, I guess, because while we weren't like, it was never explicitly said, you need to listen to them, if staff can't do or say something, they're the next in charge. It was, we knew that if anybody was going to snitch, it was going to be them.
Okay. Did you say that you we'll get to that actually. What about was there any graduating from this program?
There was. So there's phase 3, which was taking stock, or phase 1, which is taking stock. That was the histories, basically admitting everything that you had when you were there or did when you were there. Phase 2 was, I can't remember what phase 2 was. Phase 2 was kind of focused on figuring out what your core issue was. Phase 2 wasn't really all that important, but you got stuck there. So it got kind of stagnant. And once you did the couple things that you were supposed to do in phase 2, you didn't really have anything else to do. So there wasn't really any progress until they decided that essentially that you were brainwashed enough to be in phase 3. And then phase 3 was facing the dragon, where you face your core issue and really start to get down to like the reasons of it and work on it. But phase 3 comes when you graduated. When you graduated into phase 3, that was your off-campus visit. So your parents would come up for a week, and you'd get a week in the local area with them off campus. And then within 3 months, you would have your first home visit, which was a week, and you got to go home for a week. And then throughout phase 3 and 4, every 3 months, you would get a home visit for 2 weeks. I never got to phase 4. I was in phase 3. I did my off-campus. And then I had like, I was under the impression that my narcissistic father was actually going to make some effort to better our relationship. And I had been manipulated by him into thinking that that was happening. Well, for my off-campus visit, he didn't even come. And that derailed my entire progress with everything. I was supposed to go home. That was over Thanksgiving, and I was supposed to go home over Christmas. But, and it's interesting that my dad has always been like, some interaction or lack of with him has always been the trigger that leads me to self-harm. And it was the same case there. Within a week, I had self-harmed, and they took away my home visit. They took away all visits with my parents. They dropped me down to phase 2, and they extended my program 9 months, which would have scheduled me to graduate when I was 3 months away from being 20 years old. This was a youth program. We had a couple girls graduate at 19, but they would have kept me till I was almost 20 if I had stayed and graduated. And I had no idea. I did not find out until I was 20 that I could have left at 18 and nobody could have done anything.
Yeah, because of course they're not going to tell you that unless you
Right.
know prior to
Right.
going there that you're an adult and all that.
Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. I didn't graduate because on my second home visit, I was, obviously the program wasn't and had never worked for me. I was one of those people who never had any inkling that it was helpful to me. Because you know how there are survivors who at some point felt like, oh, maybe this is working. I never felt that. So on my second home visit, this was in San Francisco where we lived, I went into Golden Gate Park. I hung out with some kids who were stoners. And then I ended up meeting a guy and that day. And then that night I packed a bag and went and met up with him. And then we hitchhiked from San Francisco to Arcata, which is in Humboldt, that night. And I spent the next year homeless and hitchhiking around the West Coast with him because I felt like I had to keep moving. I was terrified that if I stayed in one place for too long, somebody was going to recognize me and take me back. And that was until I was 20. When I finally realized, hey, I am an adult and I can, if I called the cops, if somebody tried to take me and I called the cops, they take my side because I'm an adult. They can't do anything. But it took me 2 years after I was 18 to recognize that. And just to realize I could stop running.
That's crazy. Okay, we'll get to the fact that you were in Arcata because I was homeless in Humboldt County for a while.
Oh, you probably know some of the same people I do.
So we'll get to that. But okay, so you get out of the program. Do you remember them ever going over any rules, like quote unquote rules of the program with you when you first got there? Going over any sort of manual about the program, like what you're supposed to do? Like, did anybody go over any of this stuff with you, or did you have to kind of
So that was part of why they had the Big Sister program. Your big sister was kind of supposed to do that. They didn't go over especially any of the little day-to-day rules. Nobody ever went over that. That was something that the other girls were responsible for teaching me. Like, for instance, I locked the bathroom when I went in the bathroom, and the other girls yelled at me for that. They're like, we should be telling staff that you locked the door when you went to the bathroom.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was the same way at my program. Okay. And so how long were you there in total? Like the second program?
I was there 18 months, and then I was in wilderness for 5 weeks. I was gone from December 22nd, 2003 to, I believe it was June 17th. It might have been the 16th, 2005.
Okay.
So we're coming up on that date too. That'll be 19 years since I left.
Wow. Okay.
And this year it's interesting that my wilderness is closing this year. I have a trip planned to go visit the property that my boarding school is at this summer. This year is 20 years since I got sent away. And I'm trying to use it as to jumpstart my healing process again. Because it's a milestone year. It's a really big year. And I think I can use that to kind of get off of the plateau I've been in healing.
Yeah, I've wanted to go back to the program to Spring Creek, and just honestly, there's a few things I want to do there, including doing a ghost hunt. Honestly, I feel like there's tons of negative energy there, and probably a positive energy too. But
Yeah.
it's be very interesting to see.
Where is Spring Creek?
Spring Creek is in Montana, Thompson Falls.
Okay.
And so it got shut down. I was the last person to graduate from there.
Wow.
Yeah, with one other person, but we were the last graduating class from that program before it got shut down. But I've always wanted to go back there and just, for the healing, but also to do a couple other things. But it's an Airbnb now, so and the owners
Really?
the owners don't let anybody on the property, from what I hear. So
See, the way my property is, the owner still owns it, but you come off the main road onto a dirt road, and his property is right there. His house is kind of tucked in, and then you drive another mile up this dirt road to the main campus. I don't remember how many acres that he owns, but it is acres and acres and acres, and the campus is right smack in the middle. Like you would have to, if you tried to run, you would have to make it literal miles before you would even leave the property.
yeah, the way that my program was 30 miles to the nearest town, which was Thompson Falls, but everyone in that town knew who the fuck, like,
Yep, Condon was the same.
We had uniforms. So they would get paid to take you back. And the whole town of Thompson Falls was run by essentially almost all by the funds that came from Spring Creek. So
okay.
the sheriff was bought off. Like, there's a documentary you can watch where, like, you can completely tell. Like, he just straight, like, says, I'm not going to answer that question, like, several times. He's just like, I answer this question, but I'm just not going to.
So you guys, it looks like we're in the direction of Hot Springs, past there. We were between Kalispell and Sealy.
Okay, I know where Kalispell is at.
We were just south of there, so it goes Kalispell, Big Fork, Condon, Sealy.
There's a lot of programs in Montana.
Oh yeah.
Regulation.
Have you been working with Caroline Cole and Jen Shaw at all?
Actually, it's interesting. I just reached out to Caroline Cole last night to see if she wanted to do an interview with so.
Is that the first time you've talked to her?
It's the first time I've talked to her, yeah.
The next time that they are doing something legislative wise, I will send you the info, because we have a small group of Montana survivors. They've been working on getting some legislation passed up there. And this most recent one, oh my God, it's so simple. And I can't believe we got this much pushback as we did. But they proposed doing 4 what's the word? The inspections where they don't know about it, surprise inspections. So 4 surprise inspections a year. And then the other thing they asked for was unsupervised contact with parents. And the pushback we got wanted to drop those inspections down to 1 a year. Right now it's 1 every 3 years. So they dropped it down to 1 a year, wanted to, and they wanted to take out the unsupervised contact entirely. But I know there's at least 3 of us, if not 5, who wrote letters to every one of the people who were giving pushback, the people who were against it, wanting to make those changes, and they ended up passing it in its original form. So, teeny tiny baby steps, but I'll send you the info the next time we're doing something, because, they need all the Montana survivor voices they can get.
Yeah, for sure. Spring Creek was a big one too. There's a lot of people that went there. When I first got there, I think there was like 200 something people, if not more. So there was a lot.
I did not even interact, staff included, with 100 people the entire time I was in the T.T.I.
Yeah, Spring Creek was a big one. Another big one was Cross Creek, but that one was in Utah, I think.
What is it?
Cross Creek.
Yeah, that's Utah.
Yeah, Utah, and fucking, but so I went there. I went to that facility for PC too. So I've actually been to the Cross Creek facility, but
okay.
But yeah, definitely let me know. I definitely want to coordinate with Caroline Cole. And what was the other one you said?
Jen Shaw.
Yeah, I know who that is. I haven't reached out to her yet, but I'm trying to reach out to everybody, really.
Yeah, they're the ones who are working with, what is her name? I think it's Laura Smith. She is a a politician up in Montana who's basically been the sponsor for all of this.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd love to help in any way that I can. One of my long-term goals for this podcast is maybe to eventually like start a nonprofit and then just like put all the money like back into helping these kids in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Whether it be getting laws passed, getting these schools shut down, whatever.
Mm-hmm. I honestly think that every single survivor in their, most ultimate life goal somewhere has make a difference in this
Oh yeah, totally.
in some way. And everyone's got very specific ideas to how they want to do that. For me, it's I'm in school right now. I'm working on my associates. I'm a psych major. My goal is to be I started this wanting to go into forensic psychology.
Dude, I love
and
friends.
and specifically work with teenagers who have committed crimes and stuff and are in the system. And then the more that I started working with T.T.I survivors and adoptees, the more I realized that, there aren't really therapists out there for us.
No, they really aren't.
So I completely changed my entire trajectory. I dropped all of my criminal justice classes and stacked my schedule with psychology classes so I can get my degree done faster. And then I want to be a therapist and pretty much only offer services to adoptees or T.T.I survivors. Because right now, a big thing in mental health, especially for adolescents, is trauma-informed care. I want to take that a step further and provide trauma-lived care. I think that makes a huge difference because like I have a core group of survivors who, like I said, I am really strong and I have managed my triggers incredibly well. And I've done a lot of work on that. But when I get triggered, I still need people I can go to. And for most survivors, unfortunately, what triggers me is going to trigger them to the point where I need to help them. And I can't get the help I need. So I have a very small group of survivors who I know can handle my triggers and can be that support system for me. And with them, it's something as simple as saying, hey guys, it's snowing. And they know exactly how I feel and exactly the kind of support I need then. Rather than having to explain to them, hey, I had this horrendous experience and this is everything that happened to me. And then immediately be told, hey, well, maybe if you just behaved and been a good kid, or, you know, like that's usually the response. And we can't find therapists because therapists gaslight us that exact same way. They're all so intertwined with this industry that you have to convince them that your trauma was even trauma to begin with. And how are you going to make progress in therapy if you have to take that step first? And then you have to explain to them exactly the trauma and what it was and why it was traumatizing. And then you can get a little bit further. But imagine being able to start therapy with someone who you can say, yeah, I was physically abused in a program, and they instantly know exactly how you feel and what you need because they've lived it.
Yeah,
I think providing that would jumpstart the healing process for a lot of people.
I definitely agree. If almost every single therapist that I've ever went to, minus the EMDR, but she quit on me after exposing my trauma. But they've all told me that I don't know how to help you. They just said I don't know how to help you.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, what the fuck am I supposed? Okay.
And I live in Utah. I have talked in the last 3 months, I have talked to over 50 different therapists looking for somebody who can help me keep working on the T.T.I trauma, because that's really the only trauma I don't have a full handle on anymore. And that's what I want to work on. But the second I say, hey, this is what I want to work on, The response almost every time is, hey, I worked at one of those. Or, and if it goes any further than that, it's, well, I saw these places help people and it can't have been that bad. And if you had just behaved, from professional people who are supposed to be trying to help me heal my trauma.
So you live in Utah? You're like in the heart of it then.
I am.
You're in the heart of everything. Like you're in the
Yep.
heart of like woo, all that.
Yep. Utah.
That's crazy.
In 2015, so this is a little while ago, made in profit $714 million off of the T.T.I. If you combine that same year, if you had combined the profit they made from the toy industry plus the Sundance Film Festival, it's not even 2/3 of what they made off the T.T.I. The economy in this state is fueled almost exclusively by the troubled teen industry.
Yeah, that's why I feel like honestly Utah, sadly, it's probably going to be one of the. It's either going to be the first place to change or it's going to be the last place to change.
See, that's the interesting thing. There's a state senator here, Mike McKell, who worked with Paris Hilton a couple of years ago and passed, not just proposed, but passed a massive overhaul on the laws that these places have to follow. And it was huge. They were so specific when they wrote that. It specifically says you cannot use repetitive movements in punishment of children, specifically, and for example, lunges, running, squats, burpees. Like it specifically outlined very, very specific things that these programs do and got it passed into law.
So they can't do that here in Utah anymore?
Not according to law, no.
Okay.
But
they're still doing it, of course.
In December, Taylor Goodridge died due to medical neglect.
Where was this at? What school?
This was Diamond Ranch Academy in Hurricane.
Okay, just for people that don't know.
She was a 17-year-old girl. She spent 6 weeks sick, throwing up, in a lot of abdominal pain. She ended up dying from what they called untreated peritonitis that led to total organ failure that killed her. She died in the parking lot on the ground at Diamond Ranch Academy after collapsing when they finally decided that they were going to take her to a doctor. They didn't call an ambulance or anything. They were going to take her themselves, and she collapsed and died in the parking lot.
Have they done any sort of forensic examinations on her to determine if this was a wound inflicted prior to that ended up?
They have. It was just an infection. Peritonitis is an incredibly treatable infection. And it can actually go pretty far. Like it can progress pretty far before you absolutely need to get treatment. So it's not serious in any way, shape, or form unless it is left entirely untreated for a significant amount of time.
And what does this disease do, or what does it do for people that don't know? Do you know?
It is, I believe, I have to look it up again, but I believe it is an inflammation of the lining of the stomach.
Okay.
And what happened with Taylor is when, just like my feet in wilderness, when that becomes so inflamed, it can't stretch anymore, it tears and it causes internal bleeding, just like it did with my feet. And what that caused is, because it's in the digestive system, that caused sepsis that killed her.
Okay. Have they brought charges or anything about like that towards the school with this?
No.
Do you know? Okay, what happened there?
They put the school on conditional status. And conditional status means that they, one, have to inform all parents of current students within 5 days of the death. They cannot take any new students during the time that they are on conditional status. That does not mean they can't keep a waiting list. And the third thing is they have to comply with the results of the investigation that's done. That's it. When they do that, they lift conditional status and they can go back to working just how they were before.
Okay, but comply with the investigation that's going on. So that means that if this investigation ends up finding anything, or is the investigation already done? Is it ongoing still?
They just finished it. Let me pull up my, I wrote an article about this. Let me pull it up just so I know I have the documents in front of me. So I'm getting the details correct. Because this is a huge case.
There's no way we could share the screen, is there? Through Skype? Do you know if we could do that?
I think we can. Can you see my screen?
No, or not quite yet.
Oh, there we go. How about now?
Yep, I can see it now. Yep, cool. Let's do it.
Okay, so this is the one I wrote this after doing research and following this case. This talks about, what Diamond Ranch is. This right here is when they were placed on conditional status.
Okay.
This is the document from that.
Okay.
And right here, it explains what conditional status is.
Okay.
Her father filed a wrongful death suit 10 days after she died.
Okay.
This is all the documentation for that. So if you want, I'll send you the link. You can go through it.
Okay.
He was never informed of her medical state. He was never told that she was sick. Neither was her mother. They're divorced, so they're separated. So I'm going to refer to them separately.
Okay.
But neither of them were informed that she was sick. They called him for the first time when they were about to take her to the hospital. They told her that she had had a heart attack. A couple hours later, they called her and told him that she had died at the hospital. She had not died at the hospital. She died before they called him, telling him that they were taking her to the hospital.
Okay, so there's they didn't.
They did not report to the parents anything.
Yeah.
This is a video that I made that kind of outlines the specific parts of the lawsuit that explains her death. This is the incident report. I have the rest of it down here, but this is the beginning of the incident report. It was completed on February 6th, 2023. The death happened on December 22nd or December 20th, 2022. Now, what this outlines is here. It says their first non-compliance was a citation. Citations must be corrected and compliance maintained to avoid additional sanctions. So if they don't fix this, then they have to pay a fine.
Okay.
That's stupid. It says here, the rule they broke was providers and provider staff may not abuse, neglect, harm, exploit, mistreat, or act in a way that compromises the health and safety of clients through acts or omissions by encouraging others to act or by failing to deter others from acting. It says right here, the non-compliance statement is exactly what outlines the reason that they were in non-compliance with that. It says the provider was out of compliance by this rule by failing to provide and seek necessary medical care for a client who died several weeks after the initial onset of symptoms. During on- and off-site inspections, investigators conducted multiple interviews and reviewed program documentation. This information substantiated that the provider was aware a client was ill and did not take them to the emergency room or receive further medical care and evaluation. It goes on to outline what her symptoms were. It then says program documentation recorded and interviews disclosed that the client complained of back and stomach pain and at times was crying and groaning in pain. Interviews and, more importantly, program documentation supported that some of the staff working directly with the client and medical staff dismissed the client's complaints of pain and discomfort and did not take her to the emergency room. There is physical documentation of each and every one of her symptoms, when they happened, what they were, and that they chose in that moment not to seek medical care.
Yep.
Right there.
Yep.
There is physical documentation saying that they fucking killed her.
Yeah, and all they're doing is, what I'm seeing is that they're just doing fines.
Yes, exactly.
Obviously, they can pay the fines. That's like the stupidest shit I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The next one is a warning. So there is no fine with this. They just have to fix it.
Wow.
Personnel information shall include a department code of conduct that is signed by the staff member, contracted employee, or volunteer. Any training records with the date completed, topic, and the individual signed acknowledgement of training completion needs to include current CPR and first aid, current policy and procedure training, and proof of annual department code of conduct and behavior management training. This says the provider is out of compliance with this rule by failing to document required training information. During an off-site inspection, investigators reviewed medical staff's personal files and noted missing and outdated training records for at least 9 medical employee personnel files. It goes on to say that 7 out of the 9 personnel files that they looked at, there was no documentation of any training. None of the people, the medical staff at Diamond Ranch, none of them should have been employed.
Yep. Do they even do background checks?
That was a warning. That's the next one.
That's great.
It goes on to say, warning. The next one, noncompliance 3, is a warning. It is a screening agent's responsibility to keep their agency's roster and employee information current in the online system. A screening agent shall check the roster at least monthly to verify employment of employees for a renewal notice. Screening agent shall update any employee information immediately, and when they no longer work from the program, they have to remove the employee from the roster. So it goes on to say, the provider is out of compliance by failing to keep employees' background checks updated. During the inspection, the investigator noticed at least 2 former employees that were not separated within 5 business days and 1 employee that had not even cleared a background check. That was a warning as well. So they didn't have updated background checks on any of these people either. And the last one is direct supervision may only be performed by direct care staff who are in physical proximity to the clients and actively supervising with line of sight check-ins no less frequently than 15 minutes. During an on-site inspection, the investigator requested the dorm scanner report because they have scanners on the dorm or on each room that they scan every time they check. So they're supposed to be a scan every 15 minutes. There's also video coverage or documentation to verify that 15-minute checks were conducted on clients in the deceased client's dorm. So they requested the scanner reports, the video coverage, and any written documentation to verify that checks were performed. Diamond Ranch stated the client's room did not have video coverage or a room check scanner, and staff had not documented supervision checks in any other way. They had no evidence of any supervision of these girls at all for the several weeks that they were assigned to their room. There's nothing saying that they were ever supervised by anybody, even though there's supposed to be 3 forms of documentation that 15-minute checks are being performed. So yeah, the rest of this just goes over what that means. What this is an update on their conditional status as of March 17th, 2023. This notifies them that yes, they have now complied with all of the non-compliance. They have paid their fines, and they are having conditional status lifted. She died December 20th, 2022, and they were allowed to go back to regular business March 17th, 2023. They will be having increased inspections through July 2023. And that's the last thing in, next month. They'll have, it's like Taylor never died. So they're just going to go right back to operating exactly how they were before.
Yep.
All they had to do was pay some fines.
You're not on the screen, by the way.
I know. That's the end of her story.
Oh, okay. Well, corruption.
There we go.
That's all I'm going to say about that is fucking corruption.
Yep.
Money buys fucking corruption. No, seriously, if you have enough money, the law doesn't apply to you when you have enough money. Because you can buy like the entire jury, you can buy like you can buy the judge.
And like I said, the economy of Utah is supported by the troubled teen industry almost exclusively.
I'm not
political intertwinement in this state is absolutely disgusting. Mitt Romney made most of his money off of Bain Capital, which is an investment company that he started. In 2006, Bain Capital bought Aspen Education Group. Aspen Education Group is an umbrella company that owns many T.T.I programs in the state of Utah.
Yeah,
he made a lot of money off of them. And it's not just him.
I would say that Montana, I'm not sure if Montana is the same way now, but I just know that there's so many programs in Montana, I would question the same thing in Montana, honestly.
Yeah. That would not surprise me.
Yeah.
I just know Utah because this is now the second death that both the deaths that happened in T.T.I programs happened last year in Utah. There were 2 deaths, and both of them were in Utah. The other one was at Maple Lake Academy in Spanish Fork in January. And then Taylor was in December at Diamond Ranch Academy. And the other thing, so I've done extensive research on the deaths that happened in these programs. I've spent about 9 months spending 10 to 14-hour days researching them. I have bad ADHD. It was a really strong hyperfocus, but I found out a lot of information about kids that die in these places. And Taylor's death made Diamond Ranch the deadliest program in the troubled teen industry. They have had 4 deaths, including Taylor's. There's no other program that's had that many. The one that there are others that have 3. But Taylor's death brought that up to actually legitimately being the most fatal program.
I want to find, now I'm convinced, now I'm fucking going to be trying to find somebody from that school to interview because I want to know what is going on inside that school. Like,
I might be able to find you someone.
Okay, yeah, that would be very cool.
I'll look around.
Yeah, it almost makes me want to, we should just like create a fucking AI robot or something that is a teenager, right? To go into that school and just like record everything. Just record everything. That would be great.
I have a 13-year-old son.
I mean,
he's not AI.
Yeah. I mean, like, I wouldn't want to do that to any kid.
I wouldn't either. But I am, because I can say, hey, I have a 13-year-old to these programs. I kind of want to go to a bunch of them and be like, hey, I've got a 13-year-old. We're really struggling. Can I have information about your program? Like, how much it costs? And then just collect a whole bunch of paperwork from all different programs.
That's a good idea. That's actually a really good idea. Just
as
because,
much as they can give me, like, because they probably give me things like schedules and like expectations and like their claims as to what they can do. Because
yeah,
they're trying to sell a product to me.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So
Yeah,
they're
we need
not
to get
just going to send me the financial information. They're going to tell me why it's worth that.
we need to get a plant. We need to get several plants inside of in a lot of these schools. We just need to plant people in these schools. But see, that's the problem is that you can't. I wouldn't want to plant a person in there. Like that's
Yeah.
not like some sort of AI or like.
There's only one person who I've ever met who I think would be capable of that. Of being a plant in a program and not have it destroy them.
Yeah,
One person.
yeah. I mean, I honestly, I'd do it. I'd go back.
So
I might go.
you'd
I'm
have to
not
have
saying-
somebody who could pull off. You'd have to have somebody who can pull off being a teenager, right?
Mhm.
So then, you also need somebody, a teenager, somebody who looks like a teenager, who has been in one of these programs, who knows what to expect, who knows what to look for.
Mhm.
You also need somebody who is healed from being in these programs, who is not going to be triggered by being there again.
Yeah.
I have a Discord for survivors, and one of the first members that came in was a 17-year-old kid who had hacked his way through the security systems to get to the internet in his step down program in order to get onto our Discord. And this kid is incredible. He ran away. He made it 350 miles before the cops picked him up. The
Damn.
cops even told him, they're like, this is the furthest we've ever seen a kid run from one of these programs. We're impressed. And so they took him back, and he stayed another couple months. And in April, he turned 18. And he moved to Salt Lake. And I just spent the entire day with him yesterday. And I am just in awe of his resilience and, like, you know, the
Dude,
way that he's healed.
I want to interview him.
Okay, I'll talk to him. I'm going to interview him for my podcast first.
Okay. Yeah, that's
But yeah.
That's awesome. Dude, yeah, we need.
But like, I even told him, I was like, I'm so impressed by just how you've healed from this and how unbroken you are. Because, I know so many of us just feel absolutely shattered by this. And just seeing that somebody his age so young, having just gotten out of a program, is capable of getting to that unbroken place again. And it just gives me hope that, we can all do that. And we'll all get to that place where we don't feel like that anymore. But this kid is the only one that I would put in as a plant because I know that he would be capable of it and it wouldn't mess him up.
Yeah. Okay, I agree with you on that.
And he looks like he's like 14.
Except for
And he was in program. The first time his mom sent him away, he was 5. The T.T.I raised him. They were basically his parents. He doesn't even know how many programs he went to because when he was young, he doesn't know if he got sent to 2 different programs at one point or if it was the same program. He was just in different buildings in the same program. He doesn't even know how many programs he went to. He doesn't know the names of all of them.
Okay, yeah, I would agree with you but I would say one thing. What if the gravity of what had happened to him actually hasn't fully hit him yet, or even hit him at all? Because he just got out of the program, right?
Yeah, this is true. But I was one of those kids too that came out having, I don't know, being able to start healing immediately. Like I didn't have that period of time where you're almost in shock still. I didn't have that period.
I had years of that.
Right. And most survivors do. I didn't have it, and this kid didn't have it. So we were able to start healing right away. And two, and this is the unfortunate side of it, but he and I both have experienced extensive, deep trauma from the time we were very, very young, consistently. Basically, every year or every 2 years, something really big and traumatic happened to us our whole lives. So it's almost like we went into these places with the experience that we needed to manage our trauma because we'd done it so much. It was all we ever knew. And it really sucks that, you have to have gone through that much trauma beforehand in order to even be able to start healing from this right away.
Yeah, because it's almost like you're used to it already.
Exactly. And that's how he and I are. Like it wasn't just like one traumatic thing when we were little. It was like every few years there's been something really, really traumatic that's happened to us. And that is why my username on things is the original trauma queen. Because like there's not one single point of my life, there's not one single piece of my personality or who I am or how I react to things that has not been built on trauma.
Yeah.
I'm basically the embodiment of trauma. And I've learned that that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It doesn't mean that I am broken or worthless and don't deserve healing. That just means that I can be really, really good at helping other people through it.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to do with my degree. That's why I'm in school, because I know I'm good at that. And I know that I can give that to other people. I've learned to really embrace the things I know that I'm strong at. And when I know I'm not strong at something, at this point, I've met so many people who have so many different strengths. There's somebody out there who can fill that for me, I can be like, hey, I really suck at this, but this is something you're really good at, and this is really going to help. And so they're using their own strengths and honing their strengths and making them stronger by me allowing them to use them.
I think it. Yeah, I love what you do, honestly. With the just like you're super passionate.
Yeah. I have to be, because I've met so many people who these places. So I work for Surviving Abuse podcast. We're actually just expanding into the Surviving Podcast Network because he's having me take over the T.T.I stuff and start my own podcast called Surviving the Troubled Teen Industry, which I'm super excited about. We're going to probably launch in a couple months. But with that, my boss, my best friend, my brother, David, he has been doing this for 2 years and doing the podcast for 2 years and dealing with people and talking to them and trying to help people heal from every single kind of trauma out there. The trauma from the T.T.I is the only trauma that he has ever said, I need a break from this. This
I
is
need breaks
heavy.
too. I need breaks too. I'm not like I was doing this every day for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't do it. I can't do it.
And
I'm
that's how he
an
was.
empath. I'm an empath. I'm
Because
right there with the people.
I am too. I am an incredibly strong cognitive empath, and my secondary empath trait is emotional.
Yeah.
So what I can do is I feel the way you feel, and I'm able to tell you the exact thing that you need to hear in that moment. And that's why psychology comes so easily to me and why I think I can help. Because what I think of is I'm able to put myself in your position exactly and feel what you feel. And then the cognitive side is what makes it so I'm able to find the right words that are going to make the most impact.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And I love that part of me. Like, I love that I can do that.
Yeah.
and it makes it so I can help people a lot better. And that's really all I want to do.
Yeah.
Because helping people, seeing other people heal using the tools that I give them is what's fueling my own healing right now.
Yeah. For sure. Sorry, I have to close the
That's
window because the fucking ice cream man likes to come into my fucking parking lot and just sit there and play the
Oh
same
my
song
God.
over and over again.
That's
And it's just like
annoying.
it's when the Saints go marching in too.
Huh.
The Saints go march. Yep. Okay.
That's so annoying.
But anyways, so yeah, like just for anybody that might have questions about why I do this podcast, I do it because I care. Like I wouldn't do this. I definitely wouldn't do this like unless I cared. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty heavy. Like this stuff's pretty fucking heavy.
It is.
Like I wouldn't fucking
And,
do this unless I
and
cared.
like David, he's not a T.T.I survivor. He is a survivor of significant trauma. And I truly believe that trauma is trauma. There's nothing that makes one worse than another. They're just different. And actually, that kind of ties into the whole adoption thing, because adoption doesn't guarantee you a better life. It just guarantees a different life. And that's kind of how I see trauma. They're just different. But that doesn't make anyone worse or better than another.
Yeah.
But David is not a T.T.I survivor, and this is the first kind of trauma that he's encountered that he has said, I cannot deal with this consistently right now. I need to, like, he has taken a complete break from the T.T.I entirely. Like he's not interviewing T.T.I survivors. Like he's interacting with them like in our groups and stuff, but you know, he's taking a significant step back because that's what he needs. And luckily, you know, I'm there so that I can step in and we can start this new podcast so that we can continue to get survivor voices out there, because that's not what he wants to do. He does not want to take that safe space away from T.T.I survivors because he needs a break from it.
Yeah.
So that's why we're going to start something separate, and that I'm able to kind of step in and help with that. But you know, it's a different kind of trauma when somebody can deal with trauma all day, every day, like David does, and say, I need a break from this one.
Yeah.
And that's one way that it's different.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
It's just different unless you've been through it. It's just really hard to explain to people.
Yeah, it is. It is. But you know, every trauma is different. And in order to really understand any kind of trauma, I believe that you have to have experienced that kind of trauma yourself.
Well, yeah, to really put yourself in their shoes.
Right. And that's what I mean by I want to provide trauma lived therapy, because you have that deeper connection and understanding that I think can be really valuable for healing.
Yeah, I honestly like. I think it would be really cool to be a fucking forensic pathologist.
I thought about going that direction too. Like,
yeah.
I've thought about so many different things. At one point, I wanted to be an investigative journalist, and I wanted to do this stuff.
Recently, I've actually thought about doing that. Like, just
that's funny.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like I've always known I want to make a difference with this stuff. I've just never known how. And now that I'm in my 30s and it's kind of been a while and I've done a shit ton of healing, I've kind of found my place, and I've learned where I'm strong. And I want to use those strengths to make a difference, but I also want to help other people find where they're strong and allow them to use those strengths to make a difference.
Yeah.
And it's going to take all of us doing that, working together to really bring this shit down.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And
I think people focus too much on the differences, what makes them different from each other.
Yeah, they do.
Rather than, how they can, how their different skills and their different interests complement each other. And how if you put them together, you can be even more powerful.
Yeah.
Like, I think people need to be acknowledged for what they're good at, and a lot more than they are.
Everybody's different too.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, for sure. Okay. Then let's touch on a little bit about life after the program, like after you got out, adjusting back.
So, like I mentioned before, I spent the first year out hitchhiking.
Yeah.
Trying basically in fight or flight mode,
Mm-hmm.
just desperately trying not to go back. And the person that I ended up with through all of that, my son's dad, he was a severe, like horrendously bad alcoholic. And during the course of our 6-year relationship, it progressively got worse. It went from him drinking, maybe a 40 or a couple of the tall cans of beer a day, like somebody might after dinner, after a long day of work. By the time that I kicked him out and left him 6 years later, he was drinking 9 40-ounce bottles of beer a day. The second he woke up to when he passed out with one in his hand, and I had to put the lid on and put it back in the fridge, because if I didn't put it in the fridge so that he could have it first thing in the morning, he would get mad at me.
Yeah.
And it turned into a domestic violence relationship in every way, shape, or form. And I finally, after I had my son, realized kind of like that I was ready to leave that. But that's another pattern that I've seen with TTI survivors, is that we very, very often go directly from programs. Our first relationship ends up being a domestic violence one, or one that is so incredibly toxic that has the same patterns
Yeah.
that of patterns of behavior and treatment that we got from TTI staff. And we do that because it's comfortable. That's what we know. We don't know any different. We've been so deeply brainwashed into believing all of the crappy things that they tell us about ourselves. And so when that person that we, supposedly love tells us the same things, to us, that's love, because that's the only form of love we've gotten.
Yeah.
So it takes us, a lot of us end up falling into that kind of relationship just because that's what looks like love to us. That's what's familiar,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't recognize other behaviors love.
Yeah. And oftentimes, they'll get involved with drugs too. I got have
Mhm.
me involved with hard
Yep.
drugs after the program.
Mhm.
I never was
Absolutely.
interested before the program. Something about being in
I
the program and just around people that enjoyed it so much and just said you have to try this so many times.
I grew up in Northern California. Well, I grew up in Boston until I was 12, and then we moved to Marin County. We moved to Mill Valley when I was 12 in California, just north of San Francisco. So I pretty much, until I got sent away, I spent from 12 to 16 in Northern California, where everyone smokes weed. In a little tiny town where all the parents are rich, and they're rich because they work long hours, because they're lawyers and doctors. And most of them are adoptive parents who adopt their kids because so they can say they have kids and they can have this vision of the perfect family. But then they work so much that they can't ever pay any attention to their kids.
Yeah.
And the town is so small that nobody ever caters to anything for kids. So there's nothing to do there for teenagers. So everybody just smokes weed.
Yeah.
That's all I did beforehand. And I drank some because I had, again, a very traumatic experience. 2 of them happened back to back my freshman year of high school. And that was kind of the trigger for everything that led to me going into the TTI. My cousin died. He was he's my mom's sister's stepson. But in my family, even the adopted kids, the step kids, everybody is family. Everybody's always treated exactly the same way, regardless of who you came from. Even my cousin's spouses and stuff, they are treated just like everybody else. It's like they've always been family. But my cousin died, and because we understood that kind of feeling like an outsider, even if other people didn't make us feel that way, we grew up pretty close. And he was 7 years older than me, but like even when there's video of this, of when I was like 6 years old and I wanted to have a tea party, but nobody wanted to play with me, and all the boys were outside playing basketball, but he stayed inside with me and had a tea party. And even though he was like 14.
Yeah.
So we were always really close. And as we both got older, like we were both getting into our teen years, or I was preteen, he was a teenager. We kind of drifted apart a little bit because I didn't live in Utah, he did.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up getting into drugs, developing an addiction. But at the time he died, he'd been clean for about 9 months. And my aunt found him one morning dead in his bed. That was when I was 14. I'm 36 now. It was 2001. And we still don't have a cause of death. We don't know how he died or what killed him.
Was there any sort of forensic anything?
Yeah, they did an autopsy. They did everything. They did toxicology. They couldn't find anything. There's nothing in his system. There were no track marks anywhere. There was nothing wrong with him physically.
That's
And
fucking.
so there was no closure either. My mom wouldn't let me go to the funeral because she didn't want me to miss school. So I didn't get that closure either. So that really, and just in that, you can see that like my mom went to the funeral so she could be there for her sister. But I was left home alone. Like even that day, like I had to walk home from school that day because no one was there to pick me up. And then I was going to be home alone until she got back late at night. I was left to grieve by myself, just like I have every other time in my life. The first time that happened was when I was 6. So, but this one hit me hard. When I was 6, I dissociated and I don't remember a single thing from about a year from that one. But this hit me hard. And I had no support system. And I was left to grieve on my own and figure out that process. And so that was the catalyst for the maladaptive behaviors that I developed, like smoking weed and drinking and hanging out with older kids. Because that's what I was trying to cope with. And being adopted, I was already in an existential crisis because when you get into your teen years and you're trying to find your place in the world and who you are, you don't have anything to base that on. Where like if you've got your biological family around, you kind of know like personality traits that you have in common. And, you have a health history and stuff and your heritage, those kinds of things. So you kind of have some semblance of a foundation to build your existence and your identity on. Whereas when you're adopted, you don't have any of that.
Yeah, I was adopted at birth.
Me too. And then I spent 3 weeks, my mom never held me. And then I spent my first 3 weeks in 7 foster homes. So that was just like you, that was my very first trauma, was the maternal separation.
Yeah. I was really young when it happened, but
Mhm.
my remembers it. But I never went to the foster homes or anything like that. I was lucky to avoid that. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I fucking. Have you talked to your parents about what happened to you in these places? Do you talk to your parents?
I talked to my mom before she died about it. And like she put me there because she genuinely was terrified for me. She saw that I was emotionally out of control and desperately wanted me to not feel that way. And we tried, all kinds of therapy and stuff, but it was when she found out that I was self-harming, which actually wasn't because of anything that like it wasn't related to any of my trauma. It was related to the fact every single time I did it, it was because my dad had berated me for not being good enough. All the way up until I finally quit self-harming, and I've been sober for years now. Or abstinent for years, whatever you want to call it. But every time was triggered by my dad's lack of acceptance. And so when she noticed that I was doing that, I think that's what scared her enough to do anything. That's what made her desperate enough to do and listen to anything and anybody said to do. My dad wanted to teach me a lesson and wanted me out of the way so that he could have his vision of his perfect family. So he could pretend that I wasn't part of it. If I wasn't there, then he didn't have to tell anybody about me. And he's still, I tried talking to him about it once or twice, but he still thinks that it's the best thing that ever happened to me, and that it saved my life, and that I wasted his money by not finishing the program and becoming what they promised him I would be. I ruined his public image when I was a teenager. In his mind, I didn't do anything like publicly that anybody would have connected to him or anything like that. I didn't even get in trouble at school. It was just at home. But in his eyes, I ruined his public image when I was a teenager, and I will never, ever, ever be able to make that up or get that back. He will always see me as that kid who fucked up his life.
How did you do that? So how did you, like, what did you do?
To fuck
Like,
up his life?
yeah, supposedly, like.
I wasn't the perfect student. I got mostly A's and B's, but he is a severe narcissist with psychopathic traits, and it's really disgusting to watch. Basically, the best way to describe my dad is if there were some very, very small adjustments to his path in life, he very well could have been a T.T.I owner. He's just like them in the way that he treats me. And that might be another reason why I was able to start healing so quickly. It wasn't just that I'd been traumatized so much before, it just because that's how I was raised. I was raised with that, constantly being berated. Everything's my fault. I can't do anything right. No choice I make is going to be good enough. And then, the T.T.I just kind of took over. When I have negative self-thoughts, I always hear it in either his voice or the one of two staff at my program. I hear their voice, not mine. I hear them saying those things again. Not my son's dad, who just continued that. It's my dad in the program.
Okay. Okay. If you could, okay. We touched a little bit on about after you got out of the program. So you hitchhiked for a while, and I wanted to touch on that. I was homeless in Eureka.
Oh, I am sorry.
Your tweaka is what I call it. Your tweaka.
Yes, I think that's what everybody calls it up there, because that's what it is.
Like, it was fucking horrible. Like, dude, it was fucking horrible, dude.
Why didn't you go to Eureka? If you were homeless, why didn't you go to Eureka? Why did you go to Eureka? Why didn't you go to Arcata? Arcata was so much better.
I didn't have a choice. I was strung out on drugs, and my mom brought me out there, and fucking, yeah, it's a whole story. It's a whole thing. But I actually have a fucking whole documentary if anybody wants to know about that portion of my life, and like I have the before, during my addiction, and then after, like, my recovery. So 3-part series if you want to listen to that. But
I'm gonna have to listen to that. That sounds really interesting.
But yeah, a lot of crazy stuff happened in Eureka or Tweeka, and opened my eyes. Oh yeah. Like, shit doesn't surprise me anymore. Like, I've seen a lot of crazy shit. Like,
that is where, surprisingly, I lived in Eureka. I was 19 years old. I was with my son's dad. I met him when I was 18 and he was 23. So he's 5 years older than me. He was homeless at the time when I met him in Golden Gate Park. And then we spent a year homeless and hitchhiking and stuff. Well, at some point, I think it was like Christmas time, I finally called my mom, and she was like, well, we're going out of town for Christmas, but like, do you want to come here with your dog, and you guys can just stay here and watch the house and feed the cats and stuff while you're gone, or while they're gone. And I was like, okay. So that's kind of how I got back into my family. My mom, like I said, was just genuine. She just wanted to see me succeed and do good and do the best that I could and feel good about myself. My dad was the one that destroyed me with his narcissism. But I had her, and that's kind of what kept me sane. And so she was one of those parents who a lot of times my dad, if my dad had a strong feeling about something, like if he wanted something to go a certain way, he could put his foot down and she would listen. But allowing me back into their home was not one of those things. That was one of those things that she would put her foot down and say, no, we're doing this. She's coming home. And one of the very few things that he would actually listen to her about. So I went home. And then I ended up at College of the Redwoods in Eureka. My first time, I was a journalism student, journalism and anthropology. I was taking mass communications and forensic anthropology at the same time. Two totally different directions. And then I was also taking physical anthropology, and I got to go hang out at the free Eureka Zoo with the chimps that lived there. And
wow.
I'd go like every other day just to like hang out, and I do my homework there because I needed to go get away from my son's dad.
Yeah.
Because Eureka, when we lived there, was when the physical abuse started, which was kind of interesting. Like it of all the places we lived together, it makes sense that it would be that one.
Of course. Of course.
But I loved that little free zoo in Eureka. I'd go over there every day to do my homework. I'd go hang out and see the chimp, and he'd recognize me and like get excited to see me, which was super cool. But they had a little petting zoo, and in the petting zoo, they had a Great Pyrenees named Max. And he would come and just sit his head on my lap the whole time I do my homework. Like I'd sit down with my legs straight, my laptop on my lap, and just lean against like one of the buildings in the petting zoo. And he'd just come lay with me and put his head on my lap. And that's when I fell in love with Pyrenees. And now I'm on my third dog that is a half Great Pyrenees, half Border Collie. I've got two of them right now. But yeah, Eureka, that's kind of like the things that I remember most from living there.
So was this zoo like towards like the library, or was it like farther down like towards the mall? Like which direction
I
was it?
think it was in the direction of the mall. It was like right in the middle of the city. And
Okay.
like they had like a big like redwood tree grove around it. Like it was super pretty. Like if there was anywhere like that's where I went to get away from the abuse at home.
Yeah.
And I got to and because our apartment didn't allow dogs, I was a cat person until I was 18 and we were hitchhiking and I came across my first dog. It was a puppy. And that instant, I was like, I hate cats. I love dogs. And I've never owned a cat since. I've always had a dog, except for when I lived in Eureka because our apartment didn't allow dogs. My dad agreed to take that first dog for me, but his rule was that I could not ask for her back.
Oh,
He would
wow.
take her. He would take care of her for the rest of her life. He would do everything that she needed taking, she would be well taken care of, and I knew it. I just couldn't take her back as my dog. But I lived at home for, a significant portion of her life. So it wasn't really like I gave her up entirely. Like
Yeah.
I knew I'd still be able to see her a lot, and I did. And she did have an amazing, really long life. But that was my first dog. And when we lived there, I couldn't have her. And that's why I went to the zoo to hang out with Max, because that was my dog fix.
Awesome. Well, at least you had that.
Yeah. And I learned about Great Pyrenees and I love them. Like even they're such mellow dogs. They're so chill. Unless they want to roam. Like my puppy, she's a year and a half, but even at 6 months, if we had somebody over, we'd let her out of the bedroom. She'd run around, get excited, say hi, wag, lick for like 10 minutes. And then she's just flopped out on the floor, relaxing, even at like 6 months. So they're super chill dogs, except when they roam. Whenever I see a lost Great Pyrenees in like on Facebook around here, I always comment with start looking about 5 miles away because they roam and they roam far.
Yeah.
But they're good dogs. But yeah, that Eureka introduced me to my favorite dog breed and to domestic abuse.
Yeah. It's crazy that it started there. That's crazy.
Yeah. I've lived a lot of places. We lived a lot of places together, and Eureka would be the most fitting for that to happen.
Oh yeah, totally. Arcata was cool though. I went camping in like this like fucking wooded area.
Yeah.
No, that was Arcadia, I think.
No, it's Arcata. Unless Arcadia, I think, is Southern California.
Okay, Arcata. Yep, it was in Arcata. Yep.
It was probably Redwood Park.
Yep. I think it was something like that. Yeah.
Because there's like playgrounds and grass down.
There's also train tracks near it.
Oh, I know where you're talking about. That's on the other side of town.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So, anything more you want to touch on about after the program?
I can say that the two biggest years for healing and growth for me were when I was 23. I think it was just part of where my brain had matured. And like things started kind of falling into place. And that's really when I started my T.T.I, like big healing. But I also had my first kid at 23, and I found my birth family at 23, and I met my birth mom at 23, and I got to touch her for the first time at 23. Like, we just did an episode on surviving abuse about my adoption and all of that. And that was a really fun one because I did it with my birth mom. We got to do that together. And it's, kind of incredible that we can have a relationship because we've had a lot of ups and downs. There were times when we didn't talk at all. Even though we've known each other for 13 years, we didn't talk for years. But that was when my adoptive mom died, and my mom says this in the podcast, but she knew I needed space to grieve and process that. So she allowed me to take that space. And then when I was ready, I went right back to her and I was like, okay, I'm ready to have a relationship with you now. And she was there waiting, which was really incredible. And so that year at 23 was a really big year. And I've seen that consistently with a lot of people who I've known at 23. They do a lot of growth during that year. So, if you're younger and you're feeling like it's going to be like this forever, wait till you're about 23. See kind of where that year takes you. And then the other big one, and I actually read in the news recently that 36 is the age that most people are happiest. I definitely fall into that category. I'm 36 now. This has been the year in my life that I have grown more than any other year ever. Any other point ever, even combination of years, I think. I have one friend who was actually telling me that we've known each other for just about 2 years now. And he was telling me, he's like, I've seen you grow like so incredibly much in just the last 2 years. So this has been another period of significant growth and healing where things have gotten a lot better. Like I'm back in school. It really all started about during COVID, really, when I decided to go back on my antidepressants. And I got diagnosed with ADHD and started taking medication for that too. And then I was able to go back to school, which gave me confidence to then start working. I decided to work for an MLM selling stuff. I'm not doing that anymore, but I got sick of it. It's toxic. But like I had the confidence to even get a job because I hadn't worked since I had my son. I was a stay-at-home mom for 13 years or 11 years. But I always told myself that when my youngest was in first grade, when she was in school full time every day, just like my son, I would use the time that they were in school to focus on me and the things that I wanted to do to improve my life. And that's school. And then school gave me the confidence to make the first friends that I've ever had since I left my program. I was just telling my friend the other day, we met about 4 years ago, and she is the first person that I met and kept as a friend since I left my program. So it took me almost 20 years just to open myself and be okay being close enough to a person to call them a friend and want to keep them in my life long term. Mm-hmm. And so once I started making those friends and connecting with people, that's when I got the confidence to really start working with the T.T.I stuff and realizing that I that I'm not all the things that my dad and the program convinced me that I was. That it's okay to embrace who I actually am. And that's kind of what I've done. And I've started, like I keep saying, I've started recognizing and really playing to my strengths while also helping people find what theirs are and helping them do the same thing. Because that's made me, really happy, because when I'm focusing on the things that I'm best at, I get constant wins. I get constant affirmation and encouragement that I'm doing the right thing, that I'm going in the right direction, that I'm doing good, rather than trying to focus on the things that I'm not very good at. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say, hey, you're really good at this and I'm suck at it. Would you help me? So that's kind of my life mantra now. The other thing that I say all the time, and it's about the T.T.I, is trauma doesn't heal trauma. That's why the T.T.I doesn't work, because you can't fix hurt by hurting someone more. That's not what's going to work.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it
doesn't. Okay, if you could go back in a time machine and not go through those schools, would you do it, and why?
No. Because survivors need somebody like me. Survivors need the guidance and the support that I'm able to give. And I don't want to take that away from them.
Okay. And there's one question I always ask. Okay, I guess I can't remember it at this time. So, any last closing thoughts that you want people to know about your podcast? Like, where can people listen to your podcast?
So it's called Surviving Abuse Podcast. Our website is www.podcastsurvivingabuse.com. You can find information there. We have all our links on there. The other thing is, I have been working on a troubled teen industry website called Surviving the Troubled Teen Industry. You can find that at www.thetroubledteenindustry.com. I've been working really hard on all that content. I've done all the writing, the research, the interviews, the graphics, the design, everything all myself. I'm actually learning HTML now because there's things that I want to do that require it. So I'm having a lot of fun. That's kind of my pet project, but there's a lot of information about the troubled teen industry on there. If you want to be featured as a survivor, I've got a survivors, it's in the testimony section. I've got like a survivors section where I do little features on survivors and what they're doing now, and kind of like focusing on the good. So if you want to be featured in there, you can reach out to me. My email is theoriginaltraumaqueen, TRAUMA queen @gmail.com. So you can send it there. And I'm willing to connect with just about any survivor that needs it. We've got a Discord. I don't have the link right now. But if you contact me through any one of those formats, I will get it to you. So that's kind of like what I'm doing. Everything that I do kind of focuses on survivors. I just want to get as many voices out there as I can in whatever way I can. Because I think the more of us people hear, the louder we are.
Awesome. Do you have a finished website that you could pull up on the share the screen and show people real quick?
That's the one that I pulled Taylor's up from, but yeah, let me grab it. It's here. So I've got the title, got a little quote, and then I've got these sections.
Okay.
They each have different things. I'm still working on it, so I've got parts of it done, and then I've got some featured articles down here. Like I've got the death at Diamond Ranch. I've got where it compares the T.T.I and the war on drugs. It has a parallel timeline. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. The statistics from all the research that I did. especially with the deaths. This one talks about how there is no justice in the T.T.I. when kids die. And then this one's a list of all of the kids that have lost their lives in the T.T.I. And then this describes the awareness ribbon that I created. It's the blue, green, and yellow. And it explains kind of what each color means and why I chose those colors.
Okay. Cool.
So like the first one is kind of like how we were treated and then why we were there. And then the outcomes of being there. That's kind of how I divided it up.
Cool.
There's that one. And then like education has everything from an introduction to hallmarks to look for, disturbing statistics, history. This one compares the abuse to the tactics they used in 1956 on prisoners of war. This one I'm still working on, but it talks about how all of the programs are so interconnected with each other. And then I've got some educational videos that I've made. And then the investigation tab I have almost done too. I've got current events, research, articles that I've written. And then I'm going to add some program information and program closures to there. And then I've got the legislation tab started because these are the states that legislation has happened in. So I'll have a page for each one of them, but I haven't gotten to there yet.
Do we know if there's any of them in Washington State?
Oh yeah, there are.
There are.
And then I've got this connect section. I haven't done the allies or parents yet, but I've got this survivor one. So it's got the Discord link. It's got our Facebook group for our discussion group for the podcast, an interview form where survivors can fill things out anonymously if they'd like, and I will put their stories into essay form. And then the Reddit link for Reddit /TTI survivors. So yeah, that's kind of where I have it at. And then I've got testimonies is the last section. And this is the one, like, if survivors want to be featured. I only have Sabrina done right now. But like, I've got her name, I've got how many years she spent, what years they were, how old she was, what program she went to, and how many. She's an author, so I put links to her book website. I talked a little bit about her time in the T.T.I. This video is from her TikTok that kind of gives her a rundown of who she is and why she's doing what she does. Some pictures from her programs. And I'll add for her book and then some more of her TikToks and then what she's doing now, her success, her book, and all of that. So like that's how I feature survivors.
Awesome. Yeah, you should feature me on here.
I will. If you want, we can do that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Okay, cool. Still can't think of that question that I ask every time. I don't know. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. If you ever want to do a part 2, I usually leave part 2 kind of open for people.
Okay.
If nothing else, we can just do like a check-in to see how you're doing now.
Okay. Maybe, yeah, I think I want to do a part 2, but like, if you have any questions, you could make a list of questions and just do like a Q&A thing. If your listeners even wanted to send me questions, we could do something like that where I answer their questions.
Okay.
You can just send it to the email that I said. We could really do anything. Don't mind.
Okay, cool. Also, good job on the website. It looks really good.
Thank you. I might do a little bit of a redesign because, again, this is like my 8th. Because I was looking into, what is it called? Social media optimization and website optimization. And my design itself is likely pushing my result further down the list on Google. So I have to do some kind of redesign that gets around that. So now I'm trying to study how I'm learning HTML to do certain features. And then I'm also learning how to design a website that Google is going to want to promote.
That's how do you
so that's my next step.
How do you learn how to do that?
Learning things, especially new things, especially creative things, is one of my really strong strengths. I'm a creative. I started doing graphic design when I was about 8 because my sister's soccer team needed a logo. And so I started doing logos for all their merch that they, like all their gear that they wore. And then I got hired by David after making some promos for him. So I do that. Now I make websites because I figured out how to do that. And I'm actually using my T.T.I site almost as a challenge for myself to see just how many things I can learn and do on my own. So it's giving me some new things to focus on with my learning that I'm kind of excited about. Because it started out as a portfolio of my writing for school. I just wanted a way to send my articles to people without having to give them permissions on a Google Doc and find the Google Doc and then get the link and send it to them. And I could just send them a website link. So I was like, okay, well, let's throw it up on the internet. And then it turned into, wait, people are going to see this. I want to turn this into a resource. So it's my writing, and then it's all the research that I've done, which is extensive, like I was saying on the death stuff. So that's extensive. I did all that research myself. I did the analyzing the data myself, all the graphics, just every aspect of it I've done on my own. And I'm kind of proud of myself for that. So now I'm going to turn it into something fun and see how much of it I get, how awesome I can make it using new skills.
Cool. Have you done any research into the into the parallels between MK Ultra / Monarch Mind Control and the T.T.I?
Let me, not specifically those, but I've kind of started going in that direction with this. Is this one. Have you ever heard of this? It's called Biderman's Chart of Coercion.
Hold on, nothing's on the screen.
Oh, I need to share. Oh, yeah, I need to hit the button. This one?
Nope.
This was developed by Albert Biderman in 1956. This was a tool to tell soldiers how to torture prisoners of war. So they used isolation. To deprive victim of all social support and their ability to resist. Develop an intense concern with self, make the victim dependent on their captors. By using complete solitary confinement, complete or partial isolation, and group isolation. Monopolization of perception, like fixes attention upon immediate predicament. This is what pushes you into fight or flight. So physical isolation, darkness or bright light, restricted movement, monotonous food, humiliation and degradation, make resistance more costly than compliance, and force people into their concerns for their basic needs rather than their safety and security. Work people to exhaustion, threaten them, give them occasional indulgences just to make them question your intentions. Demonstrating omnipotence, show them that you are the all-being and you control their destiny and their fate. Enforcing trivial demands by enforcing stupid little tiny rules. Tell me that doesn't sound like the T.T.I.
Yeah, it does.
So we've got, personal hygiene prevented, demeaning punishments, insults and taunts, denial of privacy, semi-starvation, sleep deprivation, prolonged interrogation, overexertion, threats to kill, threats of abandonment or non-return, threats against your family, vague threats, mysterious changes of treatment, like suddenly treating you really nice for no reason, with the occasional indulgences, promises that aren't kept, rewards for partial compliance. And then there's confrontation, showing complete control over victims' fate and enforcement of rules. That is the closest I've gotten to that, but that's the direction I was thinking of going with that.
Okay. Cool. Well, like as I said, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is awesome. We've gone over 2 hours now, so this is pretty cool. Um, and I will see if I can't make a list, and we will figure out a part two or whatnot.
Okay, that sounds fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you've watched so far in the video, please make sure that you like the video. Please make sure you're subscribed. Leave a comment down below, and yeah, hit the notification bell. And really appreciate all of you. And until next time, have a wonderful day, wherever you are. All right.
I've been really going through some things, used to avoid with them beans. Part of my mind say screw it, got a whole lot to lose. Don't wanna give up like a cruise. I'm gonna kill this game, don't wanna just maintain. Caught up in my mainframe, I sometimes feel really lame. What a shame, you're perfect in every way. I hope that you know that you're gonna be okay. You don't even have to pray, everything is just gonna be okay. Just count on you, even if you feel miserable. I wish I had more friends, I got plenty of ends, but not that many friends. I feel so alone, standing in my doorway, feeling so far away from home. Thoughts up in my dome make me wanna run away from here. My future is so unclear, I just wish that I could disappear. Sometimes I just need to escape, fake and even relate.